is completely just so insane. So he cheated on me, and then he like broke up with me, and I was like, just total shock. Like I was just like, I'm so confused.
Yeah.
And then he called me like later that night and was like, I need to talk to you. Like, I need to tell you what really happened. And he told me that he had been with her. And I remember that in that moment, all I felt was relief, was just like, okay, I understand what's happening. You know, it was just like, okay.
Neptune and Pisces are spiritual energies, meaning we were getting little taps on the shoulder. You know, this is probably, especially during Neptune and Pisces, when so many people were like getting sober and things like that. Like it's like a spiritual intervention. Like something had to come in and be like, snap out of it, you know?
We don't all experience Neptune in our seventh. We all have Saturn there at some point. And yeah, I think that the combination has been this really important like ending. Like, I think it's kind of a gift that we ended Neptune and Pisces with Saturn there. You know, it's like, hey, here's all this stuff you've learned in the last 15 years, but like now maybe you can make a little bit of sense of it.
You're listening to In Transit, human stories from real astrological transits. You might be asking yourself, what is an astrological transit? Think of it like two planets getting on a subway train. They're on that train for however long it takes to get to their next destination. They might have a fight on that train, or they could have a full-on love fest. You don't really know. What you do know is this: what they discuss and how they discuss it has an effect on your everyday life. And most of the time, you don't realize how much it's affected you until the ride is over. I'm Self-Carrie. I'm an astrological counselor, and for over a decade, I've supported hundreds of individuals, couples, families, and work colleagues in using their personal astrology charts to find accurate timing for cosmically informed life and business decisions. I care a lot about timing, but what I've loved most over the years isn't just teaching people what might happen. It's hearing the story of what actually happened once the transit was over. So here we are. Welcome to In Transit. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of In Transit. I am your astrologer, Carrie Myers, Self-Carrie, and I am here to give you another episode of talking about the human side of astrology. It's not just where the stars and the planets are, it's how we're actually experiencing it. And I have a great guest, one of my favorite people, I have to say, guest today. Her name is Tenae Stewart, and she's also an astrologer. And we also have a little bit of a history, so I'll let her get into that. But welcome, Tenae.
Hi, thanks for having me. I love this concept.
I love it too, especially considering your story, which I am very versed in. And also, you know, that I wanted to give a platform for astrologers or anybody to really talk about the human experience of going through these transits that we talk so much about, you know, on TikTok, on YouTube, and all these things. It's like, you know, yes, these planets are doing this, but how did that show up for me? How did that land for me? You know?
Absolutely.
So if we start with, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I am an astrologer, kind of first and foremost. Like, that's been such a big part of my work and of what I do. But in my own life, I'm also a witch, and my spirituality is a huge part of my work as well. And I'm also a priestess in my work. You know, I do a lot of ritual work. And over the years, like, my work has evolved a lot. I'm actually going to be celebrating 10 years in my business this year. And I've been through such a big evolution in that time. And so for a long time, the work that I did was really around like having a consistent spiritual practice and creating daily rituals and all of that. And I think that's still so powerful. But more recently, I've shifted towards more of the priestess work and, you know, a big focus on like pleasure and sensuality and shadow work and, you know, some of the like deeper work as well.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited about your offerings that you have coming up this year in that. And just, you know, knowing you and stepping back and knowing your chart also and just being like, oh, yeah, that's a great way for you to be going. So We'll talk about that towards the end. But for everyone that's listening, Tenae's got lots of offers in this area, and you should definitely get in on it this year. Tenae, what is your holy trifecta? That would be your sun, your moon, and your rising.
I love that. So I am a Taurus sun in the ninth house, Aries moon in the eighth house with Virgo rising. And I have a whole bunch of other things in Aries and the eighth house too.
Oh boy. So all this Saturn and Neptune going into Aries is going to be very interesting for you.
Yes, it's very personal.
Very personal. It's all personal, right? So as an astrologer, I think you and I have talked about this before. It's like we have this second language that we can use. But for people who don't know or understand what Neptune in Pisces means, I'd love for you to give me an understanding, and I'll give one myself. But because everyone can interpret it differently. But once you hear Neptune in Pisces, what does that say to you as an astrologer?
Yeah. I mean, so, for the last 15 years, we've been experiencing this transit since 2011. And to me, I think what's most significant about Neptune being in Pisces is that Neptune is the ruler of Pisces, right? So it's at home in this sign. And so, wherever Neptune goes, whether we're looking at Neptune in your chart or we're looking at it in the transits, like Neptune is always bringing some fogginess, some confusion to whatever that area is, right? The area that sign is all about, the house that it's in for you, any planets it's touching, right? But Neptune in Pisces, I think, is particularly potent and particularly amplified, that it just brings so much of that kind of confusion about who are we and what are we doing and where are we going and what do we want, because Pisces, not only is it Neptune's home sign, but it's the last sign in the zodiac. It's this very transcendent, transitional kind of energy. And it has, a lot of endings kind of energy, right? That we're ending the zodiac. Now Neptune moving into Aries will be starting over. It'll be starting a new cycle. So I think that's significant. But I think that Neptune in Pisces, it's really invited us to really deeply trust our intuition in the last however many years, right? Decade and a half, which feels slightly trite to say because it's such a big picture concept, but I think when you really boil it down to your own experience of it, right? What house is it activating? What planets, if any? It's oh, I've been really insisted upon trusting my intuition in this area, right? It's sure, we experience it collectively, but I think when we really, and with the generational planets, I don't use them a lot in readings because they don't have that much to do with our personality, depending where they are in your chart for most of us. But I do think that sense of confusion often really clicks, when I am doing a reading and it's well, Neptune has been in this part of your chart, and it's been bringing some confusion to your relationships or to your money or to your this or your that. And people are oh yes, that resonates, right? It's yeah, I just don't even know what that area of my life is all about. So yeah, I think that, Neptune is always that kind of confusing energy, but I think Neptune in Pisces has been really doubly so,
Oh yeah. I it's double Pisces. I honestly, everybody I think in astrology has their nemesis planet, mine is Neptune.
Oh, that's so funny.
Oh my God. Okay. I'm so upset because I just don't like not seeing things, right? And so I think I like your definition of Neptune and Pisces. I love this idea of this confusion, this thing that you didn't know was kind of like a little blindfold over your life, and that as soon as you mention it to your clients, it resonates for them. Oh yeah, that's that part that I couldn't quite see so well, right? Um, when I think of Neptune and Pisces, I always think of the planet first and the elements and the kind of structure of it, And so when you think of Neptune and the fact that it almost could not be there, it's just a bunch of gas held together by gravity, you're just yeah, is it actually there? And it also represents the Piscean energy of the elder of the zodiac, the kind of energy that doesn't really care if it actually has any physical grounding. It's it's ready to surrender everything because it's done. It's done with the cycle. So there's something very spiritual about Neptune and Pisces. I think it's a place where we sacrificed, willingly, the way we do in spirituality. It's like I'm sacrificing not knowing. I'm giving it over to something greater than myself, right? But when we come to these very long transits of 16 years, like you and I have talked about how Neptune has been in Pisces for a good portion of your life, and for some people, it's been a good portion of their life. They awakened in a dream, or they came into the world in the dream, and now they are awakening to the fact that they've been in a dream. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. So what is your explanation of the house where you have been experiencing Neptune and Pisces since 2011? Because not all of us experience it in the same place. We have 12 houses in the zodiac, and that's the area of life where that Neptune and Pisces has been concentrated. So which house has it been for you today, and what's your explanation of that house?
Yeah. So Neptune's been in my seventh. And so I was born with Neptune in Capricorn, which is my fifth house. And so I think that's kind of an interesting addition, is it's like where it is natally for me is the fifth house, which is so many things. The fifth house is one of those funny houses that gets a lot of
Yes.
categories. Oh,
Free for all. Yeah.
like everything.
Let's stick it
We
there.
say it's creativity, but it's also, it's definitely like a romantic house. It can be business, right? It's like all of these like heart oriented things. And like that's where Neptune is for me naturally. And then, when I was younger, it moved through my sixth house. And then the last 15 years, it's been in my seventh house of relationships. And so I do think that that's an interesting factor, that although Pisces, it is, it's my descendant. It's across from my rising sign. I don't have any planets there though. So it's not as personal of a house in a lot of ways. But I think the fact that, it has, been opposite my ascendant, it's been about relationships and about other people, but it also kind of does reflect, if we're doing like a relationship reading, right, we're going to look at the fifth house and the seventh house. And so I do think that that's interesting, that it almost feels like it has a little extra power in my seventh because it's natally in my fifth,
Right.
But yeah, so since 2011, I was in college, I guess. Yeah, I was in college when it moved into my seventh house. And I dated a little bit in high school, so I dated a little bit before that transit, but I was like kind of a late bloomer in that area of my life. And so it's been like most of my romantic life, Neptune has been in my seventh house. And I think technically the most significant, like transit wise, that we would look at is my descendant is, I think it's 2 degrees of Pisces. So it was like right at the beginning, which is funny because I'm like, I would really have to dig in, of like what was really going on in that part of my life at that time. But as you know, it's definitely been very significant in the last like 5 years.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that, when we get into degrees, and so that's when we get into such accurate timing of like, when would that have started to show up in my life, right? But I also love what you said about bringing your natal placement of Neptune into this as well. Like we're telling a story, and the astrologers are just interpreting that story for you in particular, right? But when you're talking about like you have natal Neptune in the fifth house, so your Neptune story from birth was always kind of surrounding relationships, or the interaction with the other, the social life, the passion really that comes into those kind of connections. And then with Neptune and Pisces going into your seventh, of course, that would kind of really hit it. It's almost like it's continuing that story. It's like, what's the illusions that you might have had around that story? And it just made me think, because I hadn't thought about that. My Neptune, I'm a Libra rising. My Neptune has been in the sixth house for the last 16 years. But my Neptune natally is in the third house. And so that's all about writing. And that's what I am, a creative writer. And that has been such a part of the last 16 years of my life, is striving for this career, and in creative career, and not being able to, basically sacrificing everything for this career and for productivity and all of that stuff, and not realizing like you don't have to go about it that way. And that's also the last 16 years is when I discovered and started studying astrology. So it's almost like, you had to find something in there that was going to be different. So I like that. And I love for people who are listening to really, when you take a look at your chart and you look at where Neptune and Pisces has been for the last 16 years for you, also take a look at that natal Neptune and see how that adds to the story. So I'd love to hear, like, you don't remember when it started. It started in 2011, but you don't remember when it started to show up for you. Can you now get an idea of how Neptune and Pisces started showing up for you 16 years ago?
Yeah. So I dated someone at the end of 2016 that was short lived, but like this really intense relationship. That was very like kind of initiatory in some ways around like my romantic life and my sexuality and like things like that. I mean, I was still only I was 23.
Mm.
And then we broke up, and a few months later, I met someone who became my long term partner. And so there was like a lot of change in the span of like 8 months. It was like I went
Mm.
from having done very little dating and having had very little opportunity to do so because of other circumstances in my life. I had lost my home in a wildfire in 2015, and that just really
Mm.
that changed a lot of things. And so by the time I was sort of like settled on the other side of that, like all of this started to happen. And so I ended up in this long-term partnership that was so grounding. Like it was it was very supportive. It was very just like very nourishing. And I've realized now, like looking back, the 10-year anniversary of the fire was last year. And I've realized like, oh, like it was like a year and a half after the fire that I met my now ex, but my long-term partner, which at the time it felt like it had been so long.
Right.
But when I think about it now and I like put it in the context of other year and a half periods, right? I'm like, oh my God, like I was like still very much in the middle of all of that. But I was also ready for, some of my own like fun and nourishment and connection and support and all of that. So it's an interesting time. Like it's very much one of those periods where it's like, oh, maybe if I had had all of the information or all of the tools, maybe I would have done things differently. But at the same time, like I just had to go through what I went through.
Right. Right. And so in the beginning, it just it sounds like it feels just very safe and very grounding. And, especially after going through a traumatic situation like that, like the two of you were in the ICU, as far as I'm concerned. It's like you don't really have shocks like that. And then just, like pick it up the next day. Like you're still grieving, mourning. You're also recovering. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a lot of intensity at that time. It had been about a year and a half since the fire when he and I got together, and then about 6 months, probably not even 6 months into our relationship, there was another fire in our area that I was evacuated from. And he ended up like meeting my family during that evacuation, which went really poorly and like had a long-term negative impact. And then there was like I lost somebody close to me the following year. Like there was just a lot. Like there was so much intensity between like 2017 and 2019. Which it's interesting because that was the period when I think that he and I were the strongest. Like we had
Mm.
a few
Mhm.
things, we had some things we
Of
had to
course.
navigate at the beginning, but like I think that was when we were really like very much a safe harbor for each other. And it's worth noting that my ex has the same rising sign as I do. So this was also happening in his seventh house,
Mm.
right? So we had this sort of like parallel experience. And I will say, like, he also had been a bit of a late bloomer. And we weren't each
Ah,
other's first person, but we were young, and we were like, there wasn't a lot of people before each other.
gotcha. Is this someone that you could see yourself marrying, or you did see yourself marrying?
I did. Yeah. I mean, I think we both very much felt at one time that we would be together forever. And I always knew about myself that I very much wanted to get married, but more just for like the ritual of it. Like I liked the concept of that. But I was always unsure if I wanted like a traditional life and if I wanted kids. Like that was something I had always struggled with. And I always sort of thought, especially when we first got together, that like I would, when I got older, like I would change my mind and I would be ready for that, which is not what happened. But I did think that was true, and I always thought that like if there was anyone I was going to have that life with, it would be him, which does feel, when I say it that way, like does feel very Neptune and Pisces, it does feel very romantic, right?
Very romantic, very devoted,
Very.
And that idea that love comes with a bit of sacrifice too, because even you mentioning like, of course there was stuff. Yeah, of course there's stuff. But during Neptune and Pisces, I'm not sure if we saw how severe some of the stuff was. Like there was a little bit of a pink flag instead of a red flag,
Yes.
So tell us when that started to change, or if you know of any transits that were occurring when things started to change.
I do.
You do. Funny that.
So I actually realized this one this past fall. So I had a situation that came up in November 2025, quite literally the day that Mercury retrograde entered Scorpio, which it had not been in, I think it was 5 years.
Yeah. Wow.
Mercury's retrograde a couple times every year, but it's essentially retrograde in signs of one element every year. And it works out to a little bit more awkwardly than that. But essentially that's, sort of how it works. And so we hadn't had Mercury retrograde in water signs in about 5 years, since 2020. And so Mercury had been retrograde in Sagittarius in the fall a bunch in the last couple of years, right? We'd had lots of fire sign retrogrades. It had been we were very accustomed to that by the time we got to the end of 2025. And so the first part of this retrograde was very smooth, very easy, right? Like when we've experienced a retrograde in a particular sign multiple years over year, it's just easier, right? We know what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And then the day Mercury retrograde went backwards into Scorpio, some things went down and I was like, oh no, like I like did like an astrologer cardinal sin where I just like wasn't paying attention and was like, this is fine. This is an easy retrograde. And I immediately had this sense, I was like, oh no. And I like went and looked at old transits and I was like, so the last time Mercury had been retrograde in Scorpio was in 2020, but the year prior it had also been in 2019. And right in the retrograde window was like the first big fight that my ex and I ever had. We'd been together about 2.5 years and we just really didn't fight that much. Like we'd had a couple of things come up, and it just like we just kind of always moved past things. But we had this one really big fight. And the only reason why I know when it was because it was right around Thanksgiving. And it was right in this retrograde Scorpio window that I was like, oh, I just didn't even register that at all. But nonetheless. And so that was like towards the end of 2019 was when we first kind of started to have, issues that felt very nebulous, very Neptune and Pisces. Like when the worst fights my ex and I ever had, I swear, were about nothing. Like we would just like I think the worst fights we ever had were about like the footboard of the bed and like how to fold the towels. Like, I mean, it was like the stupid shit, where it was just like, clearly this isn't what we're fighting about, but we literally don't even know what we're fighting about, and yeah, so like we had this big thing around Thanksgiving that year. And then we moved past it. Like I remember it took us longer than it usually did. And it was a much like more of a fight, than we'd ever had. And I remember it was also the first time we didn't live together yet. But we spent a lot of time at each other's houses. And I remember that night that we got into this big fight, I was staying at his place. And it was the first time that he did something that my mom always used to do when I was a kid, which is it was probably not that late. It was November, but it was dark and we'd been arguing and he got so frustrated. He just like left. He just got in his car and he went for like a 3-hour drive. And I remember just being really triggered about it because my mom used to do that when my parents would fight when I was a kid. And it was the first time he'd ever done something like that, at least that I consciously remember, and it was just really dysregulating for me. And that eventually, like, that went on to like become more of a pattern. But
Mm.
I remember that, that incident. And then we did, like, we moved past it. And by the beginning of the year, by the new year, we were fine. Like, we were good. I mean, we were probably fine by Christmas. And then COVID started and we accidentally
Wow.
moved in together. I remember my best friend and I lived together, and he lived in kind of an apartment on his mom's property. And we were all, March 2020, all, we don't know what's happening. We don't know
Yeah.
what's going to go down. Right. And so my best friend had actually come over to his place and like had spent the night for like, I think that was the only time we ever did that. And it was like the week right before lockdown started. And she had come over and we'd all hung out. And then she went home, and it was the weekend. And I remember like sitting on the couch at his place and texting her, like, you know what, I'm just going to stay here for the week. Like, we don't know what's going to happen, but like, I have all my stuff. Like, I'm just going to stay here. And like, I'll see you soon. Like, and she was like, yeah, like that totally makes sense. And then I never went home. Like, I never went back I went back to our apartment, but I never spent the night at our apartment again.
Wow.
And so I basically just like moved in with him. And then like 6 months later, like over the summer of COVID, she actually, like, we let go of our lease with our apartment and she moved in with us, and we moved into the big house and switched with his mom. It was like a whole thing. Like, that summer was just chaos. But we like very much unintentionally moved in. We intended to eventually get a place together, but the way it happened was not how it was supposed to happen. And that summer was really hard on our relationship, which I think is true for literally everyone.
Everybody,
But
yes.
that was really a strain in so many ways. And then we were together for almost 3 more. Well, I guess about 3 more years after we first sort of accidentally moved in together. But after that, it was much more like there was like waves where like we were great, we were really good, everything was fine, and then like things were just not right,
Mm.
But yeah, it all sort of started like end of 2019, beginning of 2020.
It's interesting because so much of what you're saying about your story does have this very illusory illusion type of energy to it. Like, we don't really know why we're fighting. We're in this situation, very Neptunian COVID, like very Neptunian. Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows why, but they know this isn't real. So it's kind of just like, we don't know what's real right now. And then the continuing to stay, because that was the trying to collectively come back together, like try to pull something back together of what we knew. But all the while, you're kind of waking up to something, and waking up to yourself, I have to say, right? Because because to have a partner trigger something from your past too, it made you have to revisit some things that maybe were inside of you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and in 2021, so, we sort of like made it to the other side of lockdowns and everything. And so where the real story starts to pick up, right? Is in this like late spring, early summer of 2021. It's sort of started to feel, and I had this feeling a few times, and clearly he and I were just not on the same page in life. But I had a feeling a few times where it was like, oh, it felt like we made it through the hard stuff, where it was like, okay,
Right.
like we had this hard period. Everybody had a hard time in 2020, whatever, right? And then we kind of made it through that. And it just seems like I can think now where I'm like, oh, there's a few times in our relationship where I felt like that, where I was like, okay, everything's good now. And then he's like,
Mhm.
actually, I'm a disaster. And we were just like not living on the same planet sometimes. And so he met someone at work that we sort of like brought into our friend group and tried to set up with his best friend.
Mm.
And that was like the beginning of summer 2021. And when she first came into our lives, honestly, the very first time he ever mentioned her, not long before, but before I ever met her, I just had this like really major intuitive hit. Like, I was not comfortable with her. There was something about her that I just did not like, which is
Mm.
really is like a thing with me that I like have always, even as a infant, like I had always had very strong feelings about people, and those feelings are almost always right. on the first instinct, but I will talk myself out of it because,
Right.
you know,
Right.
you don't want to like prejudge somebody. You don't want to, you know, like you want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, you know, there's no reason to have a problem with this person, right? Like, and so I had a problem with this person that came into our lives and I could not explain it. And I didn't say, if I remember correctly, I don't believe I said anything to him about it. And then I kind of like talked myself out of it. I just like fully gaslit myself about this person.
Total
Um,
Neptune and Pisces. Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
And there was some manipulation on her part too. And he and I went to couples therapy that summer at like his request. And we did it for like a few months. And I learned, I don't know that it did anything for our relationship, but I learned a lot about myself. And I really learned some of the things about, you know, my past and what my triggers are. Like I hadn't done any, I've done lots of coaching, but I hadn't done any therapy at that point. And there was a lot of things about myself that I just like didn't even know before then,
Mm.
about my childhood and about my brother and like so many things. And my best friend from like childhood, she always used to say that I acted like the child of divorced parents, even though I'm not. Like my parents have been together for 40 years. But I would do like really classic things. Like I would get really freaked out when people would fight. And like, I just had all this stuff in it. At whatever age I was in 2021, 5 years ago, I can't do that math. I like discovered that like, oh, I have like a really core abandonment wound from when I was like a very small child that I just like never understood before. And I like figured that out through us going to couples therapy. So it was really helpful for me. I have no
For
idea. I
you.
don't know what his experience honestly of it was. And I think as a couple, it kind of like maybe it gave us some tools kind of, but like I don't know if we just weren't enough on the same page or what, you know, like why it didn't really land, but it landed for me. And that I think has definitely been a part of my Neptune and Pisces journey is like starting
Mm.
to really understand, you know, like my attachment styles and my triggers and like the things that are in there that I was very unconscious of prior.
Mm.
I bring up the person because, as Carrie knows, like that story goes on, but also because we went to couples therapy right around the same time that this person that he met at work came into our lives, which
Mm.
does it is significant in the long run.
It is significant, yes. It is. I mean, it says a lot about where he was, to be honest,
Yeah,
right? His confusion for him suggesting it in the first place.
yeah.
But I also think what's cool about this is that there were things about the way that you relate and the way that you commit, you know, that, and even like I would also say, you know, the seventh house is also like business partnerships and things like that, right? So there's probably stuff going on there as well. But through this inadvertently, through this couples counseling, you're learning how you relate to people, how you commit, um, thinking about like where did that start? You know, where did that initial like pattern of relating to other people start? And I think you're a Jupiter in Libra, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So you that might come really naturally to you, or you think it comes really naturally to you, you know? Probably in social circles, but maybe in more committed partnerships, was a bit more nebulous.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
So tell us how the story ends, and understanding that it's not truly over until January 26th.
Oh, yes, very true. Okay, so the rest of the story is so throughout 2021, we continued to like get close with this person who had come into our lives, and she became just like a really like integrated part of our friend group. The setting him up with his setting her up with his best friend really didn't go anywhere, but she became just like someone we spent a lot of time with. And so over the next year and a half, she and her sister like became really kind of very much a part of our group. And you know, initially, so like what happened is that summer when she first came into our lives, there was I think it's a very Neptune and Pisces kind of a moment. Is I came home from work one day. And my ex is a teacher, and so is, they met at work, so is this other person. But it was the 2020-2021 school year. It was right at the end of the school year. And so this was the school year that they were completely online. And so my ex had been working out of the classroom. He had taken all of his, work setup, computer and everything to the classroom so that he could like go to work, which was great. And there was a handful of other teachers on campus doing that. And so they would do, lunch together, distanced, whatever. And, most of his coworkers were women, not all, but most. And I had like never been jealous in any capacity, not of him or his coworkers or in anything else, right? Like it's just not part of my programming. And so I came home from my office one day, I think it was like May 2021. And there was this little basket sitting on our kitchen counter. And it was like a little gift basket. And I remember I walked in and he was standing there doing something. And I just like wandered over, oh, what's this? Right. And started poking around it. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cute. Like there's all these things in it that were like really personal to him, not in like a intrusive way. It was just like clearly this person knew him really well and knew his interests and knew what he was into. And I was like, this is so cute. Like, who made this? And he goes, oh, he was like, it's this girl at school. Like, she's new this year. I've had lunch with her a couple times, but like, I had no idea that she knew me so well. Like, isn't that so sweet? And I was like, yeah, that is. And I just had this like wave of what at the time I was like, I guess I feel jealous, but like, it was like this wave of suspicion, like, which was so unlike me, like so wildly unlike me. And I was just like, wow, like I remember standing there and like internally having this moment of like, what is wrong with me? Like, that's so like, it was like really intense. Yeah. And I didn't say anything to him. And over the next few weeks, they started spending a lot of time together. Like the school year ended, they started spending time together with some other teacher friends, whatever. And then she finally, and I remember being jealous, like feeling like I don't like that you're spending time with this girl, which was so weird for me. Like I was like having this like existential crisis, but I was just like, what is wrong with me? And then he like brought her around and, I met her. And in retrospect, there were some ways in which she made sure I was okay with her. There's definitely some like just Neptune, I gaslit myself. There's also some ways that she made sure that I was going to do that and that I was going to let her be around, which is really crazy when I think back on them. And it's like, oh, that was so intentional, actually. But so then over the next year and a half, she spent a lot of time with us. And I was fine with it. Like I was fully over it. And I had never talked to anybody, I don't think, about that. Like maybe my best friend, but I don't even think that I did. Like I really think I just like kept this fully internally.
Wow.
And then at the very end, like a couple days before New Year's, December 2022, my ex came to me and he had clearly been going through something. Like he was just like having a really hard time. I had no idea what was going on. And he wanted to talk, and we had this whole like drawn out conversation about like things he wanted to work on in our relationship, but none of it was new. It was like all things we knew about and like, sure, we should probably work on these things. But it was just like, I didn't know where the conversation was going or like what the point was, And I remember just getting like more and more irritated and like, why are we having this conversation? Right. And then finally he like gets to the point and spits it out that like, I think I have feelings for this person. And I was like, yeah, I know. And I remember him just like staring at me across our living room, like, what? I was like, wait, did you just figure this out? Like, I've known about this for a year and a half. Like, what do you mean you just figured out that you have feelings for her? And he was like, I don't know. Like, I just recently, like, it registered. And I was like, okay. And so we had this whole conversation about like potentially opening our relationship and like a lot of things. And I am so glad that things played out the way they did, even though it was like such a nightmare soap opera.
I remember.
Because in that moment, specifically in that conversation, I got total clarity that I was genuinely open to us opening our relationship. Like that was something that like I was genuinely open to. It wasn't because it wasn't theoretical, right? It was like we're literally having this conversation. And it's not even like like there is a person we could do it with, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not theoretical. And so I got total clarity that I was open to it, and also complete certainty that it was not going to be her. And that I was not okay with that whatsoever.
Yeah.
Over the next few weeks, there's a lot of like really great tea details, but the Cliff Notes version is over the next few weeks. He and I had a lot of conversations. I was open to it, but I needed time to catch up. And I was really not okay with it being her. But unfortunately, he had already had a conversation with her about it.
Wow.
Which was so completely out of line, right?
Yes.
And long story short, everyone is shocked that he cheated on me with her. Nobody could possibly have seen that coming.
Nobody.
No, it's completely just so insane. So he cheated on me, and then he like broke up with me, and I was like, just total shock. Like I was just like, I'm so confused.
Yeah.
And then he called me like later that night and was like, I need to talk to you. Like, I need to tell you what really happened. And he told me that he had been with her. And I remember that in that moment, all I felt was relief, was just like, okay, I understand what's happening. It was just like, okay, all right, I know what I'm working with, like it felt so much worse to just not understand what was happening, And so we decided to stay together, and we worked on it for a while. But we only made it like a couple months, it was too busted at that point. Like there was just too much, and there was too many layers. Like it really was a full soap opera for a while. And they still worked together. He still had to see her every day at work, regardless of what his feelings were. It was really intense, and our friend group was like, really still wanted her and her sister to be like allowed in the friend group, even though it was just like, it was such a thing. Yeah. It was like such a nightmare. So he and I eventually we broke up, and I moved out of our house, and that's like almost 3 years ago. And the tea, I told Carrie before we started recording that there's fresh tea. There hasn't been fresh tea in like 2 years.
Do tell.
That I just found out about right before you invited me to do this. So they dated, they got together like as soon as we broke up. They dated, they broke up, they dated, they broke up. They like completely blew up all of their friends, like our former friend group, like most of them barely speak to him anymore. Like it's a nightmare. Like I really, and like, do I take like a certain degree of joy in their chaos? Of course I do. I'm still an Aries in every possible way.
Exactly.
But also, like,
I don't think you have to be an Aries. Yeah. Give it to me. Give it to me. Yeah.
Aries.
Yeah.
But also, it like really genuinely makes me so sad. Like, I really wish that like that's not how the story had ended, and that they had really. I mean, I don't care one way or the other.
Well, this is someone you spent, this was someone who was a dear friend, right? And you were in a relationship and a partnership, and you do wish them the best. You do.
Absolutely. Like it really makes me very sad to see like just like the path that he's taken and the choices he's made. But the brand new fresh tea is they're getting married.
Of course. Of course they are.
And I hadn't even really made the Neptune and Pisces connection, but they got engaged a couple of weeks ago, and they're getting married very quickly. They're getting married in a few months. Oh my
God, honey. Like my biggest wish for you is that you never hear of this again, because the hammer and the hatchet that's coming down right now, like, and also I would say, I will say, like, for just being an astrologer and being so aware of what's next, again, like I said before, this person was it would have behooved them to take advantage of the fact that their partner was an astrologer. Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely. Yeah, but so wow, tea, girl, that's some tea.
Yes. Yeah.
And the timing of the tea.
I had not even thought about the timing until you messaged, and I was like, oh my God, it's too on the nose. It's like the last ditch romantic effort of Neptune and Pisces in the 7th house to try to make it all perfect and, fairy tale and whatever. My life,
and
however, has taken a wildly different turn.
Well, yeah. Well, let me say this real quick, and then I want to talk about that, because that is also a part of Neptune and Pisces is escapism, right?
Yes.
And I do want to say, as someone who was married to a Pisces the entire time that Neptune was in Pisces, literally got married in 2010. Okay, that kind of like choosing the escape route, it's individual for people. Like our charts, like your chart, your holy trifecta, without even going into the rest of your chart, Tenae says you don't choose escape routes. That's just who you are, right? Someone who has high Pisces, or if I recall, you said he was a Gemini.
My ex is a Cancer Sun, Gemini Moon, Virgo rising.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the water and the air of it, okay? That is somebody who's probably going to choose. So, we always have choices in life, right? And how we take these transits is also part of it. Just because you're hearing Tenae's story doesn't mean that that's how it's going to show up for you. You look at your own chart and say, well, how am I actually set up for this? So knowing your chart, Tenae, I'm like, that would never have happened to you, but yes, for him, for sure.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I think like the escapism piece, like, I'm glad you brought that up because I think it is a really important part of Pisces energy in general.
Totally.
And it's, again, doubly so when Neptune is there. And I think that my version of that, I think we've all had something that we were using as an escape in the last 15 years to some degree. Right. And for me, I think that relationship was my closest thing to an escape hatch. It was
Really?
like, this is the like stable, safe, grounded, comfortable relationship that I am always going to be able to count on. And let's see how that went. But like, that's what it felt like. And you're right. Like, I am not someone who takes an easy path. I am someone who breaks every rule that is given to me, but does it in a way that still, keeps me in people's good graces for the most part.
Yeah.
Like, those are all true things, right? Until I'm really not. But, with my ex, I think he just had this very different experience of it that he, I don't know, needed to escape. Maybe doesn't even know what he needed to escape, but
He will
in the
find
long
out.
run with this story, I think ultimately felt like he needed to escape the identity crisis that he went through because of his choices. It's very interesting. It's very interesting timing to decide to make this big commitment right in the last degree of Neptune in his seventh house. She also has a Pisces moon, so there's that.
Goodness, girl. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think it's really the escape energy it's so seductive. It's so tempting to just be like, oh, but this just feels like the thing I'm supposed to do,
I have a question real quick before we move on. It just came to me. With Saturn moving into Pisces in 2023, do you find that that's when the escapist part started to maybe reveal itself a little bit more, or there was a desire to not escape?
Absolutely. Yeah. The Saturn and Pisces piece, which I think has been really crucial in this transit in general. Like, I think the fact that we experienced the last 3 years of Neptune being in Pisces with Saturn there too, I think is really crucial. And I think it really drove home and clarified so much of whatever Neptune and Pisces has been about for individual people. Because for one thing, Saturn just like balances Neptune out in a lot of ways, right? It brings it a lot more clarity and a lot more structure. But I said, so my Saturn is the last couple degrees of Aquarius. And so my Saturn return was right before Saturn entered Pisces, my exact return. And so my exact Saturn return and Saturn entering Pisces both happened in the window between when he cheated on me and we broke up.
Wow.
And that is when there was a lot of transits I was very unconscious of at the time because I was just living my soap opera. But that is when I was very aware of. And I said to my friends, honestly, I think it was maybe a few months before all of this started. I said to my like best friends, I was like, Saturn's moving into our seventh house. Like, my ex, you'll have to edit that. Sorry. My ex and I, We knew I was
Yes.
going to do it at some point. My husband and I,
Exactly.
we're either going to break up or we're going to get married. Like that's what I said. And I kind of meant it flippantly, but I also knew it was true,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
ended up being very on the nose true. But I think that Saturn in the seventh house is a very potent transit, right? And it's one that we all experience. We don't all experience Neptune in our seventh. We all have Saturn there at some point. And yeah, I think that the combination has been this really important like ending. Like I think it's kind of a gift that we ended Neptune and Pisces
Absolutely.
with Saturn there. It's like, hey, here's all this stuff you've learned in the last 15 years, but like now maybe you can make a little bit of sense of it.
So what are you most looking forward to with Neptune moving into Aries?
Yeah. So, like I said, like that first month that it was in Aries last year before Saturn moved in as well was like one of my most creative, flowy, like abundant months in 2025. 2025 was frankly like a pretty hard year, but there was a
Yeah.
lot of really good stuff in it. And
Yes.
April was
Yes.
probably one of the best months.
I
Um,
agree. Yeah.
Even though like if I look at like the actual things that happened in April, I'd be like, oh yeah, that was actually like kind of shitty. But like I
Was the
felt good.
eclipses and all that. Yeah. Well,
Oh, it was kind of brutal, but like I felt good. And there was a couple of things that happened right at that space where like I made this big pivot in my business last year, to bring more of the pleasure and sensuality stuff in. And that really
mm.
started in April last year.
Ah,
And I came out as bi in April,
that's
and
right.
had like this wonderful like amount of support from people. I did a post on my Instagram and that was not my most viral post last year. A very hot picture of my girlfriend and I was, but the coming out post was number two, I think. And like it was just really sweet, and like there was a lot of sweetness. And my Venus, which is retrograde, is at 3 degrees of Aries. So as soon as anything enters Aries, it's like
Ah,
really touching my Venus. And I think that Neptune, even though like I've had 15 years of Neptune in my seventh house, I think Neptune touching my Venus was like really sweet. And then honestly, Saturn kind of screwed it up. And Saturn kind of made the rest of the year kind of hard. So I'm not so looking forward to the Saturn and Aries transit, I admit. But the Neptune
okay.
part, I think it does bring this like softness, and particularly crossing Venus. If you have Venus in Aries, like Neptune crossing that is just, there's a sweetness there.
Yeah.
Even if it's, my Venus is like as uncomfortable as she could possibly be in my chart, but she's still my Venus, right?
She's still my Venus.
Exactly. So yeah, I think like there is a sweetness, which I don't think is how we like traditionally would describe Neptune and Aries at
No.
all. But there is a sweetness in my chart.
Mm,
And it's a sweetness that's very particular to me, right? Because my
right.
Aries is in the eighth house. It's literally such an uncomfortable part of my chart, but it's very much me. Like I'm very comfortable in that space. So yeah, I think that is true. And then I think that the Saturn part makes me a little anxious.
Yeah. Okay. At least that's just the 2 years. Like,
Exactly. Get
right.
through
Like,
that.
well, I think I can attest really to that softness that you're talking about. Because I remember when you first talked to me, you reached out to me about doing a synastry reading with you and your ex at that very critical time in your relationship when a lot of stuff was coming up. And I was in South Africa for a period of time. So I remember it was like some random time. It was like 1 a.m. for me or something. And I was like, okay, Tenae, let's get, like Tenae needs something. What's going on? And, but you were in a place of just like, I really want to know what's happening. Like, I really want to understand. It wasn't the usual, like, how do I get back at this person? And, or just like, I really want to understand. And I think that one, doing a synastry reading in a seventh house transit, yeah, like you're confused, so you're looking for clarity. But I found that from my standpoint of seeing you go through the rest of that, you were more open. Period. Like a lot of people would have this devastating experience and then just close up, and you were like, well, no. Are there other partners? Are there other ways to do this? Right. So that blessing of not knowing, right? And then asking, our work with Neptune and Pisces is to say, is there something better here? You know, is there something I haven't been seeing, instead of closing up and just being like, I just didn't see that red flag and now I got, so I think that is, we'll be probably digesting this for years to come because this was an ass long transit. And, there's stuff that's going to pop up all over the place in the future and be like, oh my God, that was then too. Um, and so this is why you need an astrologer, is what I'm saying. So
The
with that,
thesis.
yeah. So for the ongoing thesis you're about to encounter, so I want to know, where can people connect with you, especially after hearing this story? And there's specific parts of your story that people can really connect with. So how can they connect with you? And what are some new projects that you have that people can get involved with?
Yeah. So my website, you'll find everything there. It's lupinhollow.com. I'm also Lupin Hollow on Instagram. Those are kind of the two main places that I am. And I have a podcast. My podcast is on the website. So you'll find everything there. And in terms of like new projects and things I have going on, when is this episode going to come out?
This is going to be out very soon because we're trying to
Okay.
get it as close to Neptune and Pisces as possible.
Cool. Okay, so the last week of January, starting the day Neptune enters Aries, I have a free summit happening called the Oracle Within. That's all about learning to trust your intuition. So it's 4 days, 20 classes, and it's totally free. So you can sign up on the website, or I can give you the link if you want to share that with people. And that's going to be really great. It's all classes on like intuition, trusting yourself, divination, tarot, stuff like that. And then my next summit will be in April. It's the last week of April. And that one is going to be all about pleasure and sensuality and like goddess work and things like that. So my free summits are a great way to, get classes from me. I do free classes throughout the summit. And then you get to learn from all kinds of other amazing speakers too.
Yes, I can attest, as having been one of those speakers for quite some time now. It feels like, yeah, it's just an amazing place to just learn a lot from many different people, but also be in community with people who are transiting with you, processing with you. This is our time. So I'm excited about it. And of course, I love, with my, pattern recognition skills, I love seeing you come into this space because, of course, that's what would happen after a Neptune and Pisces transit. You're
Yeah.
all about intuition now. Trust your intuition. Thank you so much for being with us here today and sharing such a really like pertinent and candid story. Yeah.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of In Transit. If this story resonated, we continue the conversation inside my private AstroCare Community, a supportive online space for people who want to learn astrology, receive weekly and monthly forecasts, ask questions about their personal chart, and most importantly, receive nervous system care and group support through every shift and pivot the planets take us on. We don't have to go through any of this alone. We can get through anything together. You can learn more by clicking the link in the description. I'd love to hear what you thought about this episode, so feel free to leave a comment. And if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and share In Transit with someone who's on a journey of their own. And if you'd like to learn more about me and my astrological offerings, you can join my mailing list for weekly newsletters or explore my readings and offerings at selfcarry.com. Until next time. Thank you for riding along.